Good morning, everybody. It's just gone 9:30, so we're a little bit late getting going. So if I can ask you all to sit in your seats, which is probably a good idea, I think, because there's nowhere else to sit. So. Welcome to members, to officers. Welcome to members in the public gallery as well. You're very welcome to listen to the proceedings as we go through them. One of the things, can I point out to members, I don't need to do this, but I will do it, that when you want to speak, make sure your microphone is on, and when you finish speaking, make sure that your microphone is also switched off, which helps with proceedings. Are there any declaration of interest, please? Yes, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I do know Mr and Mrs Pickavance as customers of my pub, and also their daughter does work for me in a part-time capacity, but we haven't discussed, I didn't know about this application until it came into the agenda, so I don't think it's relevant, but I'll take a lead from Mr Curtis.
Sounds like a personal interest, which is the kind you declare as you just have done, Councillor Evans, and are able to stay in the meeting.
Thank you. We move on to confirmation of minutes, and the confirmation of the minutes for the last meeting, which was held on the 18th of June 2025. Can we agree that they were a correct record? Can we have somebody to move? And thank you, Councillor Evans, Councillor Pittman. All those in favour, please indicate. You weren't here, I know. I know. I was just pointing it out. That's why you can't respond to that. Substitute members, please.
Councillor Collins is here on behalf of Councillor Farrington. Councillor Morris is here on behalf of Councillor Dixon. And I've just seen Councillor Taylor on his way into the building on behalf of Councillor Ledger.
Okay, so we have a protocol which I'll go through now. There will be no speakers this morning. People in the public gallery are very welcome to listen, but not to contribute. There are no registered speakers, but when we do have speakers, we break for the speakers and then come back to the presentation by the officer. On this occasion, the officer will make his full presentation. Councillor Taylor, you'll be able to take part in every aspect now because you've just arrived, so you haven't missed any of the debate. Good morning to you. Morning. There we are. Just acknowledging your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll sign the register as well.
Yes, okay, thank you. That would be great. So the officer will go through with his particular presentation. After that, we will move to questions and the debate. And then, obviously, we will move to the decision at some point. The first item is going to be, and by the way, in terms of the order paper, we will be going through 1, 2, 3 and 4 in the order that they're set out. So item 1 is Mowbray Hall Farm, Mowbray Lane, Medlar with Wesham, Lancashire, and it's to do with the erection of agricultural livestock building and ancillary hard standing. So I think this is something that Andrew is going to take us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning committee, morning everyone. Yes, this application's at a site called Mowbray Hall Farm, which is on Mowbray Lane, on the edge of Wesham, sort of between Wesham and Trails Village. You see on the plan there. It's a well-established dairy farm, substantial farm, so located in the countryside in the local plan, so that's the policy context. This scheme is for the erection of an additional cattle building. The farm's looking to expand its operations, so is looking to get more cattle housing capacity. And there are also changes in the welfare circumstances around cattle farming practices in general. So that's also a reason for this application coming before us. The scheme has been revised since it was first submitted. There's been a reorientation of the building to reduce the impact on the landscape. Now, the Town Council have been consulted but haven't made any comments on this application. But because of the size of the building, it is major development. So that means that it does need to come to committee for a decision. In this case, the recommendation is for approval with a slight amendment in the late observations that have been circulated before now, which is to reflect the fact that the Drainage Authority at Lancashire County Council have removed their objection that they had following receipt of some additional information. So I think I've told you most of the application already, but I'll just run through in visual terms. So this is the site. This laser pointer on. So this is the farm itself. So all this here is the farm. The farmhouse is here, and you've got all the collection of farm buildings. Morbreck Lane connects to Wesham to the west, Trails to the east, and then you've got this caravan park on the southern side of Morbreck Lane. This dotted line's public right of way, heads off to the north, and that I've put that on the image because that's going to be the location where you see this building most. So this is the location of the building. It's 100 metres long, so it's a big building, but you can see it sits immediately adjacent to the existing farming operations at the site. So this is the site plan that's been submitted. It's a little bit faint, which is why I did the image before, but the building's here within the red line. This is actually the drainage details, so it shows that the surface water drainage collects from the building, goes into this pond, and then where it acts as a balancing pond, and then the existing outfall from the pond comes down to the brook down to the south. In terms of foul drainage, that was something that was raised at committee. There's an existing slurry lagoon here, and that has capacity for the additional cattle numbers at the farm. The Environment Agency requirements are that your farm has storage for 6 months worth of manure, and that slurry lagoon is big enough for the existing operations and the additional operations from this existing building. Building itself looks like a cattle building, so agricultural building, open-sided at the front, might say 100 metres in length, 12.7 metres wide, 7.5 metres tall, typical steel frame cladding finish to reflect how farm buildings look. These are some pictures that the case officer took on site to show you the context. These are actually from the public right of way, so the nearest point that you would see the farm. You can see there are other large farm buildings on site. So some cattle in the foreground there. Other typical farm buildings. It's a working farm, essentially. So in sort of the planning considerations, in the countryside, policy GD4 is restrictive of development, but does support certain types, one of which is development that's required for agriculture. This is an active farm. It's well established. They're looking to grow their cattle numbers as part of their business plan, and that's why this application has been brought forward. I also mentioned the welfare arrangements earlier, which will allow this building to accommodate 150 additional cattle, some of which will be new stock and some of which will be displaced from other buildings on site to deal with the welfare arrangements that each cow now needs more space than it did previously. In terms of landscape impact, clearly a big building will be visible on the landscape. You will see it from the public right of way, but you will see it looking like an agricultural building and set in the context of a working farm. So that is a form of development that we now feel is acceptable as it's been revised. There's no major issues with access. The farm has a well-established access arrangements, both from the road but also from a series of farm tracks that bring machinery to and from the fields and to the farm itself without necessarily having to go on the highway. There are no neighbours nearby. The ecology matters have been dealt with. There's biodiversity net gain is being dealt with on site. as part of the application. As I said in my introduction, the drainage arrangements, the initial objection has been resolved through the provision of the drainage plan and some calculations that support it, which I showed you earlier. I mentioned the Slurry Lagoon, mentioned the Town Council. So the recommendation to committee is to grant planning permission as on the agenda, but with the additional condition regarding drainage that's set out in the late observations paper.
Thank you, Andrew. Members, questions?
Councillor Nixon.
Councillor Nixon first.
Thank you, Andrew. It's really encouraging actually to see a farm expanding and working and using our local farmland. I don't know a great deal about farming. I'm sure there's plenty in the room that know an awful lot more than I do. I'm really happy to hear that the welfare element is being looked after, which that again is encouraging, because nobody wants to see farming animals abused or hurt or bad farming methods. So I'll listen to any further debate, but I'm actually happy to support the application for now. So yeah, I think it's good. It's quite. I'm happy some farming is continuing in our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I am pleased that farming is going on and there is expansion. It's good to see that. I was just wondering, what, in terms of the other animals there, what percentage increase are we talking about with regard to the increase in livestock out in the fields, or whether they're going to stay in this cowshed all the time? I would hope they are going to have access to proper grass, but I was interested in how big the expansion is and possibly how much more it might be if this continues.
Let's put that question to the officer. You just switch off for a second.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer your question as with regards how many cattle there are on the farm at the moment. It is a farm that I have visited myself. I wasn't the case officer on this application, but I have visited the farm myself. I do know that it is quite an active cattle operation, dairy operation, and my understanding is that the cattle are grazed on the fields. Certainly the plan seems to indicate that it's got a series of cattle stalls in it here, rather than being a large barn where you might have a robotic milker in it and the cattle don't go out. So it's kind of got that orientation that it's and design that it's set up for that type of farming. My understanding is that the sort of farm has a business plan where it's looking to take on additional land and needs additional income to be able to support that, and that income comes from having more cattle. So I think it's all part of an intended investment in farming that the applicants are looking to do, rather than, you know, sometimes we might get applications that we have some doubts about whether they are genuinely farming operations. I have absolutely no qualms about this on that basis.
Thank you. One of my main concerns was that this might be a sort of an industrial operation, and that these cows would be there 24 hours a day in this building and would not, because that is the way farming often goes, to maximise.
The one we talked about last time that was came out in the 17th century, a very old building. I was concerned at first because he had between 30 and 50 cattle, and we were talking about 150 now. My concerns were about drainage, but they have now gone completely, because I read when we received the late observations, so I'm more than happy with that. I do have an answer for probably other people in the room do to Councillor Pittman, in that this is a building that is separate from the milking parlour, as we call it. My granddad used to call it a shippen. So the cows will go in the winter and inclement weather, where they're fed with hay that's been gathered during the haymaking time, and they'll be out grazing happily morning, noon and night during the better weather. So I don't think from my past experience that it's anything like an industrial organisation. It's merely to house them in bad weather when they're fed differently from the grass they graze. I hope that helps. Thank you.
I'm sure the committee would be thankful for the additional information that you've supplied, and it's another example of sometimes these planning meetings are very educational to members as well as other people. So thank you for that snippet of information. Councillor Settle, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy with the application, particularly now they've reorientated it so it's parallel with the other buildings. Also, Andrew mentioned that it's open-sided, which I think also helps visually. You're not seeing a big slab-sided building. You've got a sort of an openness to it, which helps it to blend in. So I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Settle. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question really about the public right-of-way. There's been a neighbour's observation that the public bridleway has been used as a cow track, but on the plan it showed the right-of-way to the left. The dotted line is the. Has the neighbour got confused? Is the track a bridleway, or is the public right-of-way to the left there?
Yeah, I've taken the public right-of-way on this image from the definitive public rights-of-way map. As you can see from this image, and if I went back to, I don't know if it's on. No, it's not. If I had a wider sorry about this. If I had a wider image, you'll see there are other tracks that come around the various fields that focus onto the site. It could be. I mean, Mowbray Lane is a road until you get to about this point, and then it deteriorates into more of a farm track and becomes more of a sort of an orienteering expedition as you head off towards trail. I'm wondering whether that might be the route that the member of the public's referring to, because the public right-of-way is here and is clearly not. It may well be running through a field that cattle use, but it's not a cattle track in the way that these are, and clearly these are made for vehicle use as well. So I do think there's perhaps a bit of misunderstanding in the neighbour comments.
Thank you.
Councillor Evans then.
Councillor Evans and then Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think some useful comments there, really, just to clarify things. I'm quite happy with the building. I think it makes a lot of sense. You can see there's access there from the farm track to the right. Obviously, in consultation with the applicants, the building has been re-augmented and changed around, so it just fits perfectly as much as a big building can behind an existing working farm. This is about an economy of scale. This is about keeping farms workable and viable with the costs that are involved these days. So I think, you know, if we want farming to remain in rural file, we have to be sympathetic to these kinds of developments. I mean, living in the country, you do farm animals share the roads, the lanes with us. You know, you can quite often go around the corner and there's cows going across the road because they were going from one field across to the parlour. Sheep as well. So you have to be aware of that, and that's why people need to drive a little bit more carefully in the countryside than they sometimes do. But I've got no issue with this at all. I don't think there's any objections from the local parish council, and I don't think there's any objections. You can see it's sitting behind the farm. There's no immediate neighbours there to be impacted by the development, so I can't see any reason to refuse it.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to raise a point about the public right-of-way, but Councillor Collins has already covered that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or any other comments that anybody would like to make?
Seeing no other hands there, Chairman.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out that it's clear in the report that when you look at policy GD4 and the A bit of it, I think there are a few there, exclusions in terms of, you know, usage in the countryside. The one relating to, you know, purposing the meeting of need in agriculture and continued operation and expansion looks as if that's fully met in particular. I mean, sometimes when we have applications from farms and farmers, increasingly we see diversification, don't we? And sometimes, you know, some of those applications are more challenging because it's very different from the normal operation of a farm. But we deal with those fairly. But in this particular case, I think it's fairly straightforward in terms of, you know, this is required in terms of, you know, continuing the efficient operation of a farm, which is, as one or two members have pointed out, is good to see, isn't it? That our farming industry is there and should be valued. Right, I'm aware that Councillor Nixon, would you be prepared to propose, because you were early on that? Somebody second? Councillor Pittman, right, okay, well spotted. Okay, all those in favour, please? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you. We move now on to application 2, item 2 on your agenda, page 20 of your papers. And this is relating to National Car Parks, NCP, St George's Road, Lytham St Anne's, and concerns the installation of a solar array on the rooftop of the multi-storey car park. And as I was about to say, Matthew Taylor is here, so welcome, Matthew. He will take us through the presentation, and then we'll break for questions again and debate.
Morning to members of the committee. You'll see that there's some late observations about this application which clarifies the means of construction of the solar array. It's something I'll pick up in my presentation as well as go through. So this is the site. It's the multi-storey car park on St George's Road. So this is Ashton Gardens. These are apartments at Ashton View. This is Sainsbury's. So in terms of the designations on the site falls within the town centre. That's the town centre boundary. Ashton Gardens is registered park and garden, grade 2. This is the Porritt Houses conservation area within this part. And this is the St Anne's-on-Sea conservation area, so it's split between the two. It's outside the conservation area but adjacent to it. There's also a grade 2 listed building in the basement of the townhouse, which is called Burlington's Bar. So these are the elevations of the car park at the moment. So this is looking up St George's Road to the north, and then looking down St George's Road from St Andrews Road. So each storey of the car park is screened by this parapet wall. That's approximately 1.1 metres high, in particular along the rooftop here, so where we're interested in. This is the roof view from St Andrews Road from the north. Looking back, you'll see that the parapet drops down. The car park's set across 2 levels, so you have a lower level and a higher level on each storey. And then the elevation looking back towards the Burlington Centre on this side. So at the moment, the upper 2 storeys of the car park are inaccessible. They're closed off by this stud wall on the access ramp. So effectively, the car park operates at 50% of its total capacity. So there's approximately 125 spaces available at the moment within the car park of a capacity of 250. So there's no access up to there. The reasons for that are lack of demand and antisocial behaviour. As noted in the late observations, the construction of the solar array, it's intended to remove this stud wall for a temporary period of approximately 4 weeks to allow access up here by transit van sized vehicles to install the solar array on the rooftop, at which point this stud wall will be reconstructed and those will remain closed off. So in terms of how it relates to the apartments on the opposite side of the road, the top of that parapet wall here is broadly in line with the lintels of the upper floor windows on the apartment building. So the significance of that is effectively the screening that that parapet wall provides in relation to those windows. So the proposed plans, there's 17 rows of solar panels. They're angled in an orientation where this is the tallest part and this is the lowest part. It comes with this section here. So the tallest part of the solar array is approximately 0.5 metre, and then the lowest part is 0.2 metres. So they're on that broad north-south angle of orientation. You recall I mentioned that the parapet here is about 1.1 metres high, so that parapet sits 0.6 metres above the tallest part of the solar panel. So you can see in this image here an illustration of what they look like when they're installed. So they're on these rubber bases here, mounted on that angle. So total generating capacity of 175 kilowatts. There's an existing plant room within the car park, and it's intended to install 2 inverters within that existing plant room to feed the electricity back into the grid. So effectively it's to generate an income for the car park operator. So the application's on the agenda due to an objection from St Anne's Town Council. That objection relates to the loss of parking and a perceived deficiency in town centre parking provision following the regeneration works and the opening of the J.R. Taylor's building. There's a number of reasons why we don't consider that's a sufficient reason to refuse the application. They're set out in the report and I've summarised them here. I'll just run through each briefly. So as we saw in the earlier photos, the upper levels of the car park, including the rooftop where the solar array is to be installed, is already inaccessible. It's closed off because of a lack of demand and issues with antisocial behaviour. So in a practical sense, that parking isn't available already. It's an private enterprise, so it's not in the control of the council. There's no planning condition that requires the car park to remain open, and there's no means of us requiring the operator to open up those additional levels that are presently closed. So the car park operator could, in theory, close the entire car park tomorrow without any means of control. So the levels that are open, as I mentioned, there's approximately 125 spaces. It's approximately 50% of the car park's overall total capacity. The applicant says those upper levels have been closed since 2019. When Highway Authority have visited and when I visited, the car parks had very low number of cars parked within it, suggesting that it's already quite underutilised, likely due to the availability of free parking elsewhere. So, for example, you can park 90 minutes at Sainsbury's and Aldi for free, which deters short visits to the car park. The applicants also highlighted that there's approximately 30 spaces in the car park that are presently leased for permit holders associated with Beaverbrooks. Beaverbrooks have planning permission to relocate to a site in Lytham. As a result, that lease expires at the end of July, so that will free up those 30 spaces that are presently for permit holders only. Just to note that the car parking SPD isn't of direct relevance in this instance because the car park isn't tied to a specific use. So it isn't like Sainsbury's where they have their own car park to serve that use. It's just a communal car park in the town centre that isn't specifically for any particular use. There's no objections from the Highway Authority regarding the loss of parking or any perceived deficiency within the town centre. The Town Council's comments mention a conflict with Neighbourhood Plan Policy GP2, which is similar to our policy GD8 in the local plan. That policy actually refers to the retention of existing uses where land is designated for specific purposes. So, for example, in the town centre, refers to business and retail space and retaining those uses of buildings. A car park isn't a main town centre use, so there isn't any conflict with the substance of that policy. So just summarising the main issues, the National Planning Policy Framework requires significant weight is given to the benefits associated with renewable energy, including small-scale projects. There's general policy support within the local plan for the installation of renewable energy technologies, including solar, subject to compliance with other objectives. The planning practice guidance encourages the use of previously developed land for solar, which is the case here, and there's no adverse impact on the town centre arising as a result. In the presentation, I mentioned the screening provided by that parapet, so 1.1 metre high to the perimeter of the roof, so it's 0.6 metres taller than the tallest part of the solar array when it's mounted at that angle. Also, obviously the rooftop's elevated to surrounding streets and buildings, so when you stood at street level, there's no perception that the solar arrays would be there. That also, those same effects mean that there's no harm to the setting or significance of surrounding designated heritage assets, so the conservation areas and listed building. The apartments at Ashton View, approximately 21 metres away on the opposite side of the road. In addition, the upper floor windows would also be screened by that 1.1 metre high parapet to the roof that will effectively shield views of certainly the closest solar panels to those windows, so they're not prominent or oppressive features in the outlook of those neighbouring buildings, and the angle of installation together with that parapet limits any potential for glimpse and glare. I've run through the reasons why the theoretical loss of the 64 rooftop car parking spaces doesn't have any harmful impacts on highway safety, amenity or capacity. Just to note that biodiversity net gain is not applicable in this case because the rooftop is a concrete surface at the moment, so there's no loss of existing on-site habitat. So in officer's view, the proposal accords with the development plan, the objectives of the framework, and is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Councillor Goodman first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this area was part of my ward before the boundary change, so it's no longer. However, I do know it very, very well indeed. I've got two concerns. The national car parks themselves, 64 loss of parking spaces. I'm just a little concerned that when the J.R. Taylor building is finally up and running, and that there may be their issues for more parking, obviously it's not going to work to go to Sainsbury's for 90 minutes. They're going to need a lot longer, maybe overnight. That's my first concern. My second concern is Ashton View. I used to have a great deal of problems with noise from the park actually there. And I'm wondering if this extra work opposite their building will be of concern whilst it can't be helped and it's only supposed to take 4 to 6 weeks. I wonder, and this may have already happened, if they have been alerted to this noise that's going to be happening to a degree in front of their building. I have no worries at all about the solar panels. I think that's great. So just those two issues. Thank you, Chair.
Right, well, I'll ask Matthew to come back and see if he can address both of those concerns.
Yeah, in terms of the loss of the car parking, there's not a great deal that I can add to obviously what's in this slide and the reasons why that doesn't constitute a reason for refusal in this case. What I would say in terms of the car park is incredibly underutilised at the moment. When I went in there, there was really a handful of cars parked in there. I would say it's probably 5 to 10% operating of what's available at the moment. So this is really the issue for the operator. It doesn't stack up commercially. So this is why they're looking for other sources of revenue. J.R. Taylor's, as I understand it, that there's a mix of different uses that are going within that building. There's some apart hotel aspect to it. There's other things, restaurants, bars, treatment rooms, where you could go for a shorter period of time and conceivably park somewhere else within the town centre. There's also the free parking on the street on St George's Road. So really, there was a demand. If there was a spike in demand and the car park was full and the operator was looking at their revenue and thinking we've had a massive spike, justify potentially them opening up those higher levels. They'd have to do quite a lot of work, as I understand it, for those to be accessible. Then that might justify that investment, but at the moment it just doesn't exist. In terms of the noise and the works at Ashton View, it is a very short turnaround. You would expect that the majority of those works are going to happen during normal daytime hours. There's no real, in terms of the installation, yes, there will be some noise associated with that. It's very short-lived, and it shouldn't be especially noisy. You know, you don't have to do things like constructing buildings where you do piling and that type of thing, so that those really harmful potential impacts will be avoided. So we haven't put any particular condition on in terms of noise, for example, restricting the hours of operation, because that will, to a large extent, take care of itself. You've got to install it during daylight hours. People will only come at specific times, and that's inevitably going to be during normal construction hours, which tends to be 8 till 6, Monday to Friday, and 9 till 1 on Saturdays. So that there aren't, we don't see that there's necessarily a need for a condition to restrict that. It's possible to impose a condition that could restrict working hours, but I think that would be the only potential noise source that could occur for that limited period of time.
Thank you. May I come back with just one more question to that? Thank you, Chair. Would it be likely, and I know this is probably a difficult question to answer, that the private owner may just communicate with the Ashton View and advise them that this is happening? I'm just thinking of the potential that we're going to get from those folk that live there. I think forewarned is forearmed, but it may be that obviously we don't know if that's likely to occur.
Yeah, I would say it's something, because of the scale of it, it's something that would be quite rare for that to happen. So normally if we will impose a condition for new building works that will include a letter drop, if you like, to surrounding properties, particularly if there's things like piling going on, but for something like this where it's less invasive and for quite a short duration, I wouldn't expect them to be doing that as a matter of routine.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon, please.
Just a couple of questions, really. Thank you, Secretary. Sorry. When you refer to the operator of the car park, that's the operator stroke owner. It's the same, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it's referred to as, I'll just clarify that although it's referred to as the NCP car park, NCP isn't actually the operator now. They used to be the operator.
Right.
It's now the owner that's the operator. It's called the Conway
Right,
Group.
okay, right, okay. So there won't be any, what I was getting at is in future there won't be some sort of discussion between, oh right, we don't own that, you don't own that anymore, new operators, and it's all in one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Are there any batteries being stored within the...
There isn't.
This sort of thing. I know batteries associated with solar power collection of the energy, but I don't know how it all works. Will there be batteries stored there somewhere?
There isn't any indication from the applicant that there's any battery storage associated with this. It's purely just the inverters within the existing plant room. But the issue with that is because it's internal, it's within the existing building. In any case, that aspect of the scheme doesn't require planning permission.
Okay. And the other was, I think you've covered really, that third floor would be available should parking extra parking be needed in the future. So you say it's like 4 floors and the top 2 are closed off. So the 3rd floor, in effect, would be available again.
Yeah, so there's 4 stories and there's 2 levels across each of those stories. So you've got like an upper tier and a lower tier within each stories in each part of the building. So at the moment, the top 2 stories are closed off. So that includes 2 levels on the rooftop and 2 levels on the story below.
So the story below, in theory, could become available should extra parking be needed. It wouldn't affect
it wouldn't affect the solar installation.
Things,
wouldn't affect that. No.
And will they always be sort of non-accessible from the public's point of view?
Yeah, there's no way of actually. I attempted to walk up onto the rooftop, not knowing that this was the case when I first visited, but you physically can't get up there.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm surprised that you said 2019, but now you've explained the ownership. I mean, when I worked in St Anne's for many, many years, as far as I can remember, the top 2 tiers were never open for a very long period of time. I'd left here in 2010, and I don't think they were open then. So maybe NCP closed them off, and then when somebody new came in, they decided to open up and see what happened, and they've come to the same conclusion. So as a car park, that car park has always, from its inception, been underutilised, which is a shame, but that's the case. One of the things that you mentioned was that Beaverbrooks are pulling out of their 30 spaces. Maybe a good opportunity to offer, for the owners to offer those 30 spaces to JR Taylors in advance of their building coming online, because if it's an overnight accommodation within there, it might be quite useful for them to have a car park which is literally around the corner from that building. So I think that would be helpful. I agree with Councillor Nixon that there's nothing to stop once this minimum impact installation of solar panels goes ahead. There's nothing to stop the third tier being utilised if for some reason the town suddenly gets busier, and that is an option. We can't really influence them in reducing their prices. That's up to them. But you know, there is extra capacity in there on the 2 existing open floors, so I really can't see an issue with that. The only noise that I could potentially see was if they were drilling into the concrete to secure those solar panels. So that would be the only noise that I could see. Maybe you could give us a steer on that. Presumably they're going to have to be fixed down so they don't blow away in our windy weather. But apart from that, I think anything that brings solar into the town, alternative uses of industrial buildings or underutilised buildings is a good thing. So I'm happy to move this application.
Okay, we take note of that. Thank you. I suppose the other thing we ought to mention is that it's unlikely that, for example, we'll have another application for solar panels on the 3rd floor, will we?
No, absolutely not.
That's one thing we can say. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly feel this is a very sensible and pragmatic way of utilising something that must have been making a loss for a long time. And I'm pleased that a built-up area is now going to provide solar energy if it's passed. Because just relying on agricultural fields, I feel is quite unfortunate, because yeah, open fields do give you the wide open space, and it's an easy hit for solar panels development. But built up areas, there's a lot of wasted space, and I do feel this is sensible and appropriate, because it was obvious a long time ago that this car park was not really wanted, and many people don't like multi-stories. So I would fully support this, and I'd be prepared to second for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Pittman. And Councillor Gardner, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've lived in St Anne's for 40 years now, and I've never been in that car park. So I think it's an incredibly underused building. My only comment would be, and I'm absolutely delighted to see that the rooftop is being used for solar. I think a lot of members have commented on that as well. I think it's a fantastic way of using that sort of space. My only other comment would be, have the owners of the J.R. Taylor building been informed about it? And have there been, do we know to our knowledge, been any communications about that? Because that would be a concern of the town, I think, who possibly think that that building is going to be earmarked for all the car parking that will be possibly generated by that building. Thank you.
Well, you've posed the question. Let's hear if there's an answer.
To my knowledge, that the applicant has said to me that they've had discussions with other potential operators to replace Beaverbrooks. I don't know what the extent of that is and who they've discussed that with. It's something I can certainly raise with them or point them in that direction and say, do you know this development's happening? You might want to get in touch with the owner. Certainly happy to point them in that direction, but I don't know whether that has happened yet.
Vice James?
Thank you. If I can just come in on that point, I think this is a classic example where both councils have got an opportunity to act like a dating agency, if you like, and put people with mutual interest in touch with each other. Certainly, I've discussed this with other members of the planning committee at St Anne's. Unfortunately, I wasn't there myself on the day, but I would certainly, again, reflect that. I'd be happy to discuss that with the operators and the JR's owners. So thank you for that point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Councillor
Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. The problem with going probably last is that everybody's made my comments, but I do remember us in the Town Council meeting with one of the owners of the Conway Group, who were based in Ireland, some 10 years or so ago. And even then they were saying it's very, very underutilised, the worst performing car park that they've got. So I'm pleased after 10 years they've come up with an idea to actually generate some income. Otherwise, I could see the car park being closed, bulldozed, and apartments put up. So it's an excellent idea. I do also, though, sympathise with the Town Council that you don't like to lose car park spaces. But having said that, as Matthew said, it's almost empty every time you go past it. The Beaverbrooks are moving out now, so yeah, bearing in mind what Joanne just said, J.R. Taylor's could easily sort of take over at least for 30 car park spots and make it known to their people. If they don't do that, I've also noticed that the car park's now offering car parking all day for £5, which is an incredible offer. And even then, you don't see it much used. So I think they're trying their very, very best to make some money out of this. And solar panels is an excellent solution. So I'm very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm even last after Councillor Settle. I just want to say that I think it's an excellent idea. I too have never used that car park, and I don't know of anybody who has. But I think it's important that we have car parking facility like that in the town centre, especially with all the development going on, our own development of the town centre and of eventually of the sanctuary when that eventually opens. I mean, we don't know what their expected footfall is going to be anyway. So the 30 spaces that become available from Beaverbrooks might be adequate for them. Plus, as you said, it's only 10 to 15% utilised anyway, and it's only 50% open all the time. So I think it's an excellent idea, and it's, as Councillor Settle said, it's better that they do this and make some money than decide, as you said, it's the worst performing car park, that they just shut it down and we're just left with an empty building. And what do we do with it? So I'm very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Evans.
Thank you for letting me come back in there, Chair. Just as it's not a planning issue, but as an observation, you know, we're spending millions of pounds trying to generate people's interest in coming into the centre of town, and maybe we as a council should be asking officers or the various tourism department whether or not we could promote the fact that you can park in the car park for £5 for a full day would be not a bad idea. I'd be flashing it up at the bottom of the page.
I can just guarantee that conversations along those lines have been going on and will continue to go on. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, that you've got just round the corner from the event square, as it will be now, but St Anne's Square, you've got this parking capacity with no signage in the square, just round the corner from the townhouse, and it literally is on the edge of the square, but it is underutilised. The other couple of points that I would make is that, as has been said, you know, there is no requirement on part of the operator to deliver any particular number of car parking spaces. So from a planning point of view, that's a sort of serious point. But also, in terms of policy, if you look at the local plan and CL3, it talks about renewable and low energy, and that significant weight should be given to these policies when we're considering the benefits and perhaps on some occasions the disbenefits with schemes like this. And I also think it's quite refreshing to have a scheme in the urban area, in the town centre, rather than necessarily employing them in open field sites. So I think it's something to be welcomed. Have we got any other further speakers or comments or contributions to be made by anybody? Councillor Gardner.
I'm sorry. I think it's a really underused asset of the town, and I don't know whether there's ever been any planning interest or anybody interested in taking up the offer of reutilising those premises.
Well, I'm not aware at the moment, and I think, you know, if we're very specific to the application before us, it's overlooking the station, isn't it? And, you know, we're aware of that. So we take note of your comments. But I think I'm going to move to the vote now. I believe Councillor Evans, you said you were willing to propose this, and Councillor Pittman would second it. So can we vote, members? All those in favour, please indicate. Any against? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Application 4, which is page 50, and this is in the late. There is a late obs on this. If you want a few seconds to have a look, you probably looked at it already.
Did you want?
I think in the late obs it refers to this application as actually land adjacent to Market, rather than yes, because this, I suppose it needs to be clarified, is very much about the external space, not the activity within the building. I'm going to ask Rob, who is the case officer here on this particular item, to do his presentation, and then again we'll go to questions and then any debate. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everybody. So yes, we have two items to consider for this next presentation. So the first one is a full plan application which relates to the use of the external space to 8 Market Hall for external drinking, which would be ancillary to the restaurant that occupies 8 Market Hall. as well as the erection of a bin store, which includes a 1.5 metre high timber fencing enclosure. There is also a listed building application for the bin store enclosure as well, because Market Hall is a Grade 2 listed building. So the application site is the red space. The blue line identified on there is the building itself, which is presently occupied by Savannah's Bar and Restaurant. That's positioned within Lytham Town Centre. The reason for committee referral is because of the application site being ownership of the council. So the site, as you can see from the aerial image, occupies an island site which is shared with a Grade 2 war memorial. Market Hall, like I mentioned before, and the memorial are both Grade 2 listed buildings, and the site is also positioned within Lytham Conservation Area. So just a couple of photos of the site as it used to be. So it relates to the southern unit of Market Hall that used to be occupied by Lloyds Bank, which has now vacated the premises. You can see from the top two images that land subject to the plan application, land around the building, that was used as a car parking space to this western elevation just here, and then pedestrian circulation space about the building as shown by the image on the left hand side. Just for a little bit of context as well, the site is extremely prominent. As I say, it's an island site, so all elevations of the building are particularly visible within street scenes, within the conservation area. This bottom left-hand image is an image took from Hastings Place and from more central areas of the town centre, which, as you can see, there's views over the Memorial Gardens into the if you will, the front elevation of 8 Market Hall. So the development as proposed is this left-hand image. The right-hand image is the original submission. So as you can see, it relates to use of the external space for dining and drinking purposes. It includes tables and chairs. These greyish oblong features are planters, and the building footprint is defined by the grey thicker line that you can see there. Let me just change my pointer. There we go. And then we have the bin store in this location. Just to point out as well, the scheme has been revised. As you can see from this bottom image, the footprint of the bin store, it covered 1, 2, 3 of the arch windows within the building. Concerns were raised to the size and of that footprint for obscuring elements of the listed building, the proximity and visibility to the street scene, and then obviously the appearance of the conservation area as well. So negotiation has been had, and that has led to the image on the left hand side, which has reduced and relocated the footprint of the building to a less prominent part of the site. Just as well, for information purposes, this grey line around here is the footpath edge. The red line is obviously the land which the council own. That land is demarked by the planters, so there's no actual encroachment of the development itself onto the footways that serve Market Square or Hastings Place. Just a quick snapshot of the building elevation, so we can see the left-hand image is the original submission, the right-hand image is the revised scheme, so we can see obviously a much less impact from the fence line on that listed building. You can see it's located also to a more or a less prominent position on that building. The fencing is 1.5 metres tall and is going to be stained to match windows within the Savannah's restaurant. So the works have been undertaken, say, for the bin store. So I've just included a couple of images there really to show the extent and what the planters and umbrellas and paraphernalia associated to the external space look like. Importantly, though, you can see from this top right-hand image that the planters don't encroach onto the footpaths that envelope the site. Just as a side note as well, there is a van presently in situ, and we are under the understanding that that is used for refrigeration purposes, used in association to the restaurant use. As a bit of background, in the northern unit to Market Hall is another bar and restaurant called Barrique. That has an external dining space and drinking space, which you can see in the left-hand image. The time of use of that external space was considered by planning inspectors previously, and that has been agreed to operate until 10 o'clock at night. And through other applications, Barrique has also incorporated a bin store on its northern elevation, and the bin store that's proposed, the enclosure to that, is very similar in scale, appearance and staying as that existing enclosure that you can see in that image. So moving on to main issues. Design. We have policy GD7, which obviously requires high standards of design. There were initial concerns for the design and layout of the original bin store, but the revision that's been received has relocated that to a comparably less prominent location. It is more discreet, but nonetheless it is still exposed and visible from public vantage points. But those views are, shall we say, they're diluted to a certain extent by the presence of the planters and tables and chairs and the backdrop of the building itself. So it's considered from an office perspective that yes, there are going to be impacts to street scene views, but that isn't sufficient to recommend refusal of the scheme. Second issue is heritage. We have policy EONV5 and NPPF, which seek to conserve and enhance heritage assets, and by heritage assets we mean in this circumstance the listed building of Market Hall and the conservation area. So we have Market Hall and the memorial as well, which are grade 2 listing, and the conservation area of Lytham. So the conservation area of Lytham isn't just focused on the town centre, it extends quite beyond the town centre boundary, particularly in the western eastern edge of the centre. The revision has certainly improved the relationship to the listed building and the conservation area, but nonetheless, again, like the design assessment, will have harm to those heritage assets. In this circumstance, it's considered that harm is less than substantial, and in that respect, the policies of the council and the NPPF require a balanced assessment against what public benefits might arise from the scheme. And in that respect, the bin store is a necessary requirement of the restaurant use, ensures the longevity of the listed building, and also with the lack of vacancy of that unit adds to the vibrancy of the town centre. Again, we need to consider what visual harm there might be from the presence of bins within the listed building setting and indeed the street scene, and what benefits the enclosure itself would bring when compared to a bin store that didn't have any enclosure or screening. So less than substantial harm has been reported, but there are public benefits, and advice from officers is that now would accord with ENV5 and NPPF guidance. Amenity wise, policy GD7, that requires new development to be sympathetic to surrounding land uses. We have commercial row to the south of the external area. There are first floor flats above those commercial units, and we have visitors accommodation within the county hall, which is positioned to the west. Notwithstanding that though, it is a town centre location. Residents within those areas will experience higher noise levels. The noise levels certainly aren't the same as what you would expect within a quiet residential area. So we consider that the town centre location allows support for the external areas, particularly bearing in mind there are a number of other establishments within the town centre that also have external spaces. Notwithstanding that though, we also think that there should be restrictions imposed, and that is to prevent the 24-hour use of the external space. And based upon the inspector's decision at Barik, it's advised that that should be till 10 o'clock at night. There's also controls to restrict the outside playing of live or amplified music within the external space, and it's important for members to realise that this application relates simply to the external space. It doesn't relate to the building or any noise emittance from that building, nor can we prevent music or amplified sounds within the building itself through this plan application, because it simply relates to the external space itself. So, Chair, on that basis, applications are recommended for approval, but that is subject to expiration of the press notice consultation, which will be on 24th of July, which is tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Could I just point out to members, I think I mistakenly said it was item 4. This is obviously item 3, which is on page 39 of your papers, and item 4 is the listed consent, which is obviously related to this application. But a separate one, but we'll have a separate vote on that as well. Councillor Goodman, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Microphone back on for me,
okay.
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, so I think we can have a single session of questions and debate followed by 2 votes, as Chairman indicated. Before we move to the debate, I have before me an email which I believe will inform that debate. It's from Councillor Karen Buckley, who says, and it relates to the late observations, I've read the late observations and would like to comment because what is stated is misleading. Point 1. The minutes of Lytham Town Council's meeting of the 25th of June, as displayed on the Town Council's website, do not record an agreement for the Chairman to write requesting a meeting, nor that consideration of the planning application should only be undertaken after such a meeting. And point 2, a request from the Chairman of the Town Council to discuss Savannah's occupation rights was not taken up. However, given that he referred to a number of unspecified planning and licensing inquiries that were outstanding, I asked officers to arrange a meeting with members of Lytham Town Council and made this clear in my response. I am content for these points to be read out at the meeting today. Kind regards, Councillor Karen Buckley, Council Leader. I hope that's useful to the debate that's to follow.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
So we can go to Councillor Goodman.
Councillor Goodman, we can come to you now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Is it possible to have the photograph that was in colour from the Memorial Gardens? You mentioned Barik at this, absolutely perfect. I was in Zest last week and walking back up to Hastings Place at 9:30, there were tables and chairs outside Barik, the right-hand side, the darker side of the colour there, absolutely. And I am utterly convinced that they stretched all the way along to the corner, to the left-hand side as well. Now, whether or not they were using that space because it's there, which is why I'm a little bit confused, because it's not a retrospective application, but there were tables, chairs, it was very busy, it was warm, but there were also those freestanding outdoor heaters with the flames. Can I just check that that is the area that we're talking about facing onto the Memorial Gardens, i.e. right next to Barik's outside area, but also does it go round the corner as well of the building? I'm looking at our agenda here, in that it would be facing the main road in, if you will.
I shall explain in detail. So at the moment in this top left-hand image we have Barik here, and then we have Savannah's in this.
Yes.
These white umbrellas, they form part of the external space to Savannah's. If I go to this, so those umbrellas in that photograph are these umbrellas here. So we can see this elevation of the external space that is directed towards the Memorial Gardens.
Correct, yeah.
The external space then wraps around the end of the building to Market Square, and then wraps around to the other side of the building, opposing the County Hotel.
I was just going to say opposite there and eventually into Hastings Place.
Yeah, so it is.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, the use is retrospectively, it is in operation at the moment.
That's really helpful. I hadn't realised it was going almost round all the sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodman. Councillor Evans.
Right, okay. Try not to take up too much time. Well, there's so many different things with this. I mean, Councillor Harrison, that clarification from the leader was very helpful, because in reading the submission from the chair of Lytham Town Council, it sort of suggested that a meeting was sought with the CEO and with the council leader, and I mean, obviously that would under normal circumstances have been batted straight back to planning, because it's a planning matter, it's not a matter for those individuals. So I was a bit surprised about that, and it is important that we push back and actually clarify that to the Lytham Town Council. This is an interesting application, because to me it shows how confusing it can be from the general public, because we have a licensing consideration, a planning consideration, an estates consideration, and each one of them are interlinked, but we're not allowed to look at them. So from the point of view of the licensing application, as far as I understand it, the outside area was not to be considered by the licensing application, but most of the conditions that were in the licensing application were put on the area outside, is my first point. We did in the first place, and we all said that this building wasn't viable with just the internal space that was there. It needed the outside space to make it a viable commercial building. And now we're in a situation that, having given planning permission for it and given licensing for it, we're now looking at the outside space the last. So I understand that's the process that we go down, but from a layman's public point of view, they find that very confusing of how we can look at it that way. And even down to the point that we are, the biggest impact on the local people that live around there will be the noise, but we're not allowed to consider the noise emanating from inside the building. So then I'd like to park those there if I can, because I need to come back in.
Can I get clarification of this?
You can do.
Thank you.
Just as a sort of, I think, a clarification of the sequence of events. The use of the building, the Savannah's building, as a restaurant is not something that requires planning permission. So there's not been any previous discussion, either by committee or by officers under delegated powers, about the use of that building as a restaurant from a planning perspective. There is a permitted change from the previous use as a bank to a restaurant, because both uses fall within Class E of the use classes order. What there has been is that there's been a consideration by the council as licensing committee to grant a premises licence for the use of the building because of its licensing function, its licensable activities that it undertakes within that building. So that has gone to the council as licensing committee. We are now dealing with this planning application and the listed building application because the land that surrounds the building is in the council's ownership, and so it couldn't have been covered as part of the premises licence application. So it needs planning permission for its use as sort of ancillary space to go with that restaurant. If this planning permission is then granted, there would then need to be a licence granted by the council as landowner for the applicant to use it. So yes, it is confusing, and there are several hats that the council wears at different times for different parts of the building. But hopefully by going through that sequence of events, that sets out where we are in that journey towards dealing with this as a council.
So just for me to interject then, that means there's two licences. There's one relative to the building itself, there's one relative to the external space. and then separate to that, we have the plan application for just the use of the external space,
Yeah.
the bin store, and then the listed building application for the bin store.
Thank you very much
It
for
might
that
be helpful
clarification.
just to, rather than
Bring it
talking
in,
about two
Curtis.
licences, to refer to the Licensing Act licence, the licence, and the permission from the council to use its land as a consent. That's just a suggestion to just to avoid using the same term in two different contexts.
Thank you.
Thank you for that helpful clarification. As a councillor myself, I obviously felt that was in a planning meeting that wasn't actually taking place. It just shows how confusing it must be to people on the outside looking in. And I agree with Councillor Goodman that it is further confusing because the space is fully in operation at this moment in time. Couple of points, I'll be as brief as I can. From a point of view of the corner of Hastings Place and Market Street, I've got a little bit of concern with the seating where it is now, because it's quite a dangerous junction that in terms of people aren't approaching it at speed, but we have had a road traffic accident that ploughed into the building opposite, into the doorway there. And so we could do, if we're going to allow seating right up to that corner, apart from the pavement, obviously, and I know there are some trees around that area, that it might be useful to put some more sturdy bollards in place, like the ones that are further up, to at least safeguard if something like that was to happen. Second to last point, I've got a little bit of concern about the side that is adjacent to the Memorial Garden being used, especially at Remembrance Sunday weekend. There's a concern there for that, and I'd like to see some kind of conditionality put on that. The van that's in place there, obviously we're told in the documents, won't be in place there as a refrigerated vehicle to support the kitchen once the new bin store is in place. But I would gently suggest that if we are looking to sympathetically retain this listed building conditions, that we've already got a bin store next door at Barrique, that we should actually match it. It should be the same height and the same design, so that it just blends in rather than having a slight difference in fencing, because I think that would be more suitable. And I've probably got five other comments, but I'll leave it for there right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got just a few queries. Yeah, also just one of them is picking up on the fridge van. Just wondering what will replace that? How will they, carry on with their refrigeration once that van's gone? Just about the chairs in the winter as well, because you were saying that that's going to help to buffer the site of the bin store. Will they be a permanent feature? Will they be out even in the winter? I suppose we can have dry days if they've got patio heaters, but are they going to be a permanent fixture? Talking about the, as Mr. Curtis says about it's not a lease, it's a consent to use our land. Is there going to be, are we going to do it as a lease? Are we going to charge them for using that land, or is it just going to be a permission to use our land as part of their business? And last but not least, is there going to be room in the bin store? I agree also that it should match Barrique's, but is there going to be room in the bin store for extra bins when compulsory food waste collection comes in for all commercial sites next year?
Some really good questions, Councillor Morris. I think they're processing them now. Where would you like to start, gentlemen?
Thank you, Councillor. I shall try and recall all your queries. So the first one was to do with the fridge van. Yeah. So clearly the fridge van, we are on the impression that it's being used as a fridge van. I can't say categorically that it is, but we are on the understanding that it is. So obviously that would indicate to me that there isn't sufficient space within the premises for refrigeration purposes. This might sound as a bit of a get out, but I have to just decide the application that's in front of me. Yeah. That doesn't include refrigeration. Yeah. So in theory, I can't consider the needs of the business for refrigeration. What I will say is, though, that obviously this space historically has been used for car parking. Yeah. So there's nothing to prevent the occupier from parking a van there and continuing to use that space as it is at the moment.
Just following on from that point, I'm just to confuse matters further with other hats that the council wears. It has a role in food safety, and I've spoken to the officers from that team about the food storage needs of a business of this nature in that location, and that is something that that they're actively going to take forward through their powers. As Rob says, parking a van there is something that's happened for years and years. If you look on all the street view images, there's always been a vehicle parked in that location. So that current arrangement is something that's no different to that, but it may not be a permanent solution, and that may well be something that comes in due course following those further discussions.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I think the second was removal of fixtures and fittings, those kind of thing. None of the chairs, tables, umbrellas are fixed to the ground, so they don't need planning permission to be there. They are just go with the use that we may be approving today. So we can't insist from a planning perspective that the chairs and tables, umbrellas are put away when not in use. My understanding is though that the licence may be able to
consent.
Yes, the licence itself may be able to consider those matters.
I think Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. If it does help, the licensing committee is one of the conditions that they put in place when they gave their licensing permission, was that all tables and chairs in the outside area shall be either fixed to the floor or to be stacked, secured and covered no more than 30 minutes after the time at which patrons are no longer permitted to consume drinks in the area. So I hope that helps.
I think we agree that does help.
I think, Chairman, if I may, this demonstrates exactly why licensing planning should be separate. It also demonstrates to an extent why planning isn't always what we think it is, what the public think it is, and in some cases it is specifically what they think it's not. But I think this is a very interesting discussion on those lines.
And I think the latter point is what Councillor Evans was making earlier on, that in terms of planning, it can cause a perception amongst the lay public and confusion about exactly what the situation is and who determines what are the guidelines and what are the rules, etc., which is understandable because it's quite challenging for us, isn't it, at times? So,
I think I just said that, Chairman.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
There were 2 more questions.
There were?
Yeah. Yeah.
Charge on the land. So again,
I can address
that's
that.
certainly something that extends. Hang on.
Sorry,
Please do not interrupt.
Isn't it nice that they're queuing up to address your question? There we are. So get in a queue. There we go. We'll start with Rob and then we'll go to Ian. If
My colleague in legal will, I'm sure, interject at some point. But charge on the land, again, is not something that the planning application deals with. That'll be dealt with. Obviously, it's within council ownership, so you would expect some kind of rental value to be paid to the council for use of that land. I'm sure my esteemed legal colleague will enlighten.
Yes, the council's estates team has negotiated a commercial fee on a commercial basis for the use of the council's land should planning permission be granted by the committee this morning. It won't be a lease, it will be a consent, what we'd normally call a licence, but we're not calling a licence today, so as not to confuse you. A consent for initially a period of 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
And I'd just like to make the point that sometimes people have asked why at a planning meeting we have so many other people, officers, etc. here. And I think this particular application actually it's really good to support the officers in terms of further explanations and clarification, but we need that at times for ourselves as well and for the general public who might be in the public gallery at the moment or watching this, that we need those clarifications and advice at certain points in the debate. So, which is why we have people like Ian Curtis, etc., and Catherine with additional advice. So, thank you for that.
And just final question.
And lastly, room for additional bins. So obviously, the slide up there, we've gone from a position from the original submission which perhaps provided too much space for the storage of bins. We've now gone to a position which the priority is on protecting the listed building, the conservation area and the street scene. So from those perspectives, the bin store needs to be as small as possible to accommodate the needs, I suppose, at the present time for the business. So we've got 2 large Euro bins in there. I think they're 1,500 litre capacity. Then we've got 2 glass bins in there. There is, I suppose, room for additional bin storage in some respects. You could have another one in here. You could increase the size of those existing bins, those kind of things. But obviously, if there's a need for an additional or enlarging that space, that will be subject to planning permission and listed building consent. They would need to reapply, and then at that time we can consider the priority of the listed building, conservation area and street scene.
So we might be back here then.
Might be back, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. This may be a newbie question, because obviously not been on planning for as long as some people here. But why are we discussing it retrospectively? Why has this been allowed to happen before it's got to planning? And I think we may have been discussing this already, but I'd just like that real clarification, please.
Quite simply, because the planning process allows it to happen. So you can build things, you can put an extension on the back of your house without planning permission. You can sometimes get away with it, sometimes your neighbours raise the issue with the council. The council then would consider, whether it's worthy to submit a plan application. If it is worthy, application will come in. We will then go through the determination process like we're doing at the moment, and then planning permission is granted in what we call retrospective sense. Alternatively, planning permission is refused, and then we would then progress enforcement action to remove whatever structure has been erected or whatever use of land is being made. It's a shortfall of the system potentially, but nonetheless is one that can happen.
And technically, I think it's always been viewed that it isn't illegal, is it? That's also a central point, which probably doesn't console you, but that's another fact, I'm afraid.
So it's just harder to take something away than to allow it in the first place. And I would have thought that from a business perspective, and there have been issues within Lytham, to my knowledge, where we've had to fight the removal of things, it just strikes me that it is a bit nonsensical to do it that way round from a public perception.
I would agree. I mean, the officer assessment really should ignore the fact that it is retrospective. Whether there or not there is immaterial to our assessment. What I would say is, though, if we do refuse retrospective applications, we need to be sure, because there's an appeal process that the applicant can go through, and following the whole process through, from an enforcement perspective, that structural use will be required to be removed. So.
Okay, thanks for answering my newbie question. Thank you.
And just one further thing I'd add, Councillor Gardner, is that we sometimes go back to the very basic mantra of what we do here, is that we are obliged to deal with the application before us, even if it's a retrospective application. So we have to deal with the application almost as if it isn't retrospective, in the sense that that's the application before us that we... Exactly, yeah, all right, thank you. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank everyone for particularly the officer, for their contributions about how this finally came, as it's hopefully the last stage on its journey, it has been to licensing, and we were aware that there were issues about the outside space which would have to be resolved later. It certainly concerns me that, as Councillor Evans mentioned, the Remembrance Day activities, which this is pretty close to, and I'd like to think that this establishment is not going to interfere with what happens on Remembrance Sunday. My concerns are mainly actually about the number of staff that will be required to actually man this area, because it's a wraparound area. It's actually quite extensive, and I'm not sure about how many they would be employing there. But I would like an indication of how effective they're going to be in terms of controlling this outside space, so as that the public are not upset by the proximity that there obviously is. My other concern was what might spill out onto pavements, because Lytham is not without lots of establishments that do interfere unnecessarily with the public's right of way on the pavement, and it has happened across the road at Zest that basically it can be very crowded, and this does worry me, because there are a lot of contraptions, not exactly vehicles, but they do occupy the pavement, and this is yet another example of where the pavement is going to be maybe encroached upon. It could get very busy, and I would like to think that again Savannah's is going to be able to monitor the exterior of their premises to safeguard the public. The planters, are they Savannah's own planters, or are they, and basically, can they increase the number of planters? That's a question that I think is important, because it does and could well restrict the area. And certainly they could encroach a little bit further, because
Councillor Pittman, I'm going to stop you there because you've raised a couple of points, and some of them may not be directly planning related in terms of this, but I'm going to let the officers clarify that, because you've made a couple of points. Just switch your microphone off as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Just to pick up on a few points. Firstly, one that Councillor Evans raised as well, in terms of use of the external space during times that the war memorial or memorials may be taking place there. It'd be very, very hard, I think, to restrict use of the outside space to coincide with when the memorial space is being used as well. I would sincerely hope that any patrons that are using that space at the time of a remembrance, for example, would certainly respect that, and that obviously the patrons of Savannah would respect that as well, and make sure that anybody who's seated outside, having a coffee, having something to eat, would respectfully be quiet during the periods that they needed to. The other issue as well is that I mentioned Barrique has an external space that is time restricted, but there isn't any kind of restriction on that space to stop it from being used during the memorial periods, as there isn't on Zest or any other external space within the town centre as well. So in terms of consistency of decision making, the council really need to tie in with decisions that have been made previously. In terms of control of the outside space, and you mentioned staff, Councillor Pittman. Now, all the doors, sorry, all the arch windows that you can see here are external doors. Obviously, in the summertime, they are going to be open, so that's going to allow the staff within side to keep an eye on what's outside. When they are closed, they're glazed, so again, they can obviously see from within the building to outside the building. Now, I don't know how the owners of Savannah's operate their business, but when I was a waiter at the London Hotel down the road, I had my little patch outside that I used to look after. So you'd expect the staff to regularly monitor those spaces as well. So I think because of that and the relatively small number of tables outside, it will become self-policing to a certain extent by the owners. In terms of pavement spill out, now I brought these images up because, like you rightly said, there are planters dotted around the edge of the external space, and they clearly demarcate where the pedestrian public footway is and where the external space is to the building. That is a very strong defensible barrier. Yes, people could walk into the external space through those planters, but I see no reason why those planters aren't sufficient to make sure that there's not going to be the spill out of tables and chairs onto that footway area. And if they did, then obviously there's highway legislation in the sense that those blockages can be removed because they are obstructing the footway.
My hope would be as well that the proprietors there running an establishment like this right in the middle of a prestigious site in Lytham would be sensitive to particular occasions that are occurring around them at that time. And in November in particular, you're talking about probably fewer people eating out and using the external space anyway. So I think the likelihood of sort of intrusion there is perhaps reduced by those particular factors. Vice Chair.
Just on that point, we have a very similar parallel in St Anne's with the Pavilion Cafe, and the proprietors and staff and customers of that cafe are always very respectful when we have the remembrance service in the park by the War Memorial. I certainly hope, and I'm really sure I don't need to hope, that the proprietors and staff and patrons of Savannah's would treat it in a similar way. Also, before we take the next speaker, I think Catherine would like to come in.
Yes, of course.
Lastly, about the timing of the bins. Obviously, Barrique has bins and Savannah has bins. Are they going to be emptied at the same time, or is it the same operator? I would hope so, because basically there's going to be a lot of sort of clanging of bottles, etc. at certain times, or two separate times of the day, if they are not collected at the same time.
Yeah, just following up on one other point Councillor Pittman that you made in terms of ownership of the planters. I assume that's in the sense that additional planters may be needed to create a stronger barrier between the external space and the pedestrian space. I think the planters are in the ownership of the tenant. I can't see any reason. Well, there's an advert certainly on there. I can't see why the council themselves would go to the expense of providing them for Savannah's. Like I said before, I don't believe there's a need to strengthen that barrier any further. I think the planters that are in place do their job quite well. I also understand that there's a reference to the number of planters in the licence that might be issued. So in that case, obviously, if additional planters to come along, there's implications not just necessarily for planning, but more for the licensing arrangements. So that would need a license or revision to the license to be issued. But I say from a planning perspective, I think that provides defensible means, particularly when you think about some of the other external spaces which were within Lytham Town Centre that don't have any defensible space at all. They just are tables and chairs next to the footway. So I think in that respect, then I think we are, or I am satisfied certainly, that there is appropriate defensible boundary between the public and the private area to stop that encroachment of the external space into the footways, and then obviously the knock-on effect for obstruction of those footways.
With respect, I think I'm going to... She might have something to contribute as well.
It was just in regards to the Remembrance Sunday concerns. We have staff who facilitate those services both here and in Lytham, and staff always make a point of speaking to the staff at Barrique ahead of the service starting. Barrique are always open during the service, but are all, as Councillor Harrison said, with the pavilion here in St Anne's, they're always very respectful of the timings around the service, and we've never received any complaints or concerns about the behaviour of patrons during the Remembrance service at Lytham.
Just to say, yeah.
On that basis,
yes.
I'd be prepared to propose that we approve.
Okay. All right. We'll make a note of that. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Yes. The other business that's in place.
In Market Hall?
Yes, the outside business that's using outside space already. The agreement and the arrangements that we're going to have, are they all similar? Because I don't think it's fair that you have one set of arrangements for one business and a completely different set of arrangements for another.
When you say arrangements, in terms of hours of operation, or...
Well, in respect of use of the planning permission to use our land,
Yes, I can help with that one.
Yeah.
The circumstances are different there. It's just a quirk that the council owns the land around Savannah's. The land around Barrique is actually owned by that property. So the use of that land as ancillary space for the for that business was included as part of the planning permission when they got consent to use that as a restaurant and bar 10 years ago. So
right, thanks. Well, that's sorted out, isn't it? Thanks.
I just want to take this opportunity to say that obviously we're spending some time in this application, but I hope members feel, and members of the public as well can see this, is that an application like this sometimes can raise a myriad of issues, and it's very useful from a member's point of view as well for members to raise these questions, for other members to listen to the answers and explore what those answers are, because obviously there's always an element of training within these particular planning meetings that we have. And I think it's a real opportunity, and that's why we go to such a great extent to include questions and debating about the particular application, which sometimes takes a considerable amount of time, but it's really important that we have that opportunity. Councillor Collins, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. From what you've just said, I think that's why it's important that we don't have a proposal and a seconder for an application until questions have been answered, until we've had a reasonable amount of debate. I mentioned this before, and what you just said reinforces
and that's been mentioned for members to take into account. So members have heard that again. You know, you will have to make those judgments yourself. And if you note, when we do have an early contribution in that way, it's always noted but never acted upon until we've had the full debate. So you make a good point, and I'm glad you've raised it. Thank you. Are there further comments now that people want to make, or questions? Yes, Councillor Evans, thank you.
Just a couple for clarification, if you would do. I take, you mentioned before, Rob, that the vehicle could be parked there. Am I to assume from that then that the bin store area that's been allocated is not the same space that the bin is, that the vehicle is occupying at the moment? Because it looks like the barriers and the tables go right up to the bin store. So unless they're going to be reduced and the van's going to go alongside them, so that I'd like to clarify. And then finally, I'm sure everybody would be pleased to know that, as you rightly say, the doors on both sides are open in decent weather, and so the noise from any music and any live music then permeates out into the surrounding area. One thing we've noticed from the Deacon altering their outside space and reducing the glazing by 50% is that noise level now carries through the centre of the town. So am I right in thinking that noise pollution from inside the building is not a planning consideration, it's an environmental consideration?
Rob, would you like to come and answer that?
I'll carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Owen.
Wordle.
So,
do you want to come in before, Rob? you
If it assists, one of the additional conditions that the licensing committee put on this permission was that external doors and windows shall be kept closed whenever entertainment is being provided, except for the purposes of access and egress.
So you could rightfully assume that they would reduce the number of doors and they would just use them to provide service for outside, because I think there's 3 on both sides of the building at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Rob, do you want to continue now?
thank you, Chair. Yes, so there was a question in terms of parking or the continued parking of the refrigeration vehicle. There is the possibility that this space here could be, whether the vehicle's parked approximately at the moment, that this space could continue to be parked at the expense of these 2 tables and chairs and the expense of these 2 planters. And the way I say that is it could be part implemented. So they don't have to fully, they're not committed to fully implement this scheme. The problem, or sorry, it's not a problem. Catherine and Ian will tell me otherwise, but if the tenant wishes to use any of the external space, any of our land for external car parking and refrigeration, then that needs to be within the lease agreement to coincide with the use of the external space in the bin store area.
It's just taken on from Councillor Morris's point that if we've, you know, in terms of increased bin capacity in the future, I'm trying to future-proof this, that if we have said that through discussions we've reduced the bin space so that we've matched up the windows in effect on this side, that if we then say it's up to the applicant to decide whether or not they want to park a vehicle there, then that's going to reduce the numbers of open windows and doors on that side. So is that something that we can put a condition on, that we say, are you either going to use it as a vehicle space or are you not?
I have to take what's in front of me at the moment. That clearly says to me that we've got this bin store area and it refers to bin store and delivery access. It could be that the intention is to park the delivery vehicle in that space in there. Whether it's wide enough, I don't know. But all I can see at the moment, or what we're assessing at the moment, is what's in front of us. But I'm sure Ian's going to interject in a minute. I'm pretty sure that if any of the external space is going to be used for car parking or external refrigeration, then that needs to be within the licence agreement. So whilst planning might not be able to exert any control, there's a further level of control through the licence that might be applicable.
And so if to my earlier point, if we said that it might be more for the listed building part after this, if we said that the bin store is to be the same size as the Barrique's bin store, same height and same materials, then that might be a way of controlling that spreading. Because the point being, if you allow a vehicle to be parked there for 12 months and then we say, well, there's been a vehicle parked here, so what's the difference between us making the bin store twice the size? Then there's a bit of leeway in there, and that obviously will change the configuration of how the building looks aesthetically, which is a concern, I think. But that's great. Thank you, Rob.
Just going back in terms of appearance and height of the fence line, so that is actually based upon Barrique. So Barrique, we went through, or the officer at the time went through, going outside measuring bins to make sure that the actual height of the fence was a minimum height to make sure that the bins were covered. The staining of that fence line matched the staining of the windows. Now the same officer dealt with the conversion of Savannah's, and there's the consistency between the staining of Barrique windows and the staining in Savannah's windows, and the application form with this application confirms that the staining of the new fence line is matching the windows in Savannah's. So if you follow that logic backwards, then it should all tie together.
Excellent, thank you.
Ian, if you'd like to come in, thank you.
Yes, just to back up what Rob was saying, Chairman, there is, in this instance, because we own the land, there is an additional measure of control that we have through the licence consent agreement that's proposed to be entered into. As presently drafted, and as we understand agreed in principle by the operator, that allows for the stationing of a certain number of tables and chairs, etc., and doesn't refer to use for car parking. So if it was to be, if any part of the land was to be used for car parking or for a van, then that would have to be negotiated separately as part of the consent.
And final point on noise from the building. So yeah, I think my opening line was our assessment has to be clear that it relates to the external space. It doesn't relate to noise disseminating from the building. Notwithstanding that though, there are other levels of control which the council can impose through stat nuisance. So if the noise becomes to such an extent that it's receiving large amount of complaints, then the environment protection team can then get involved. They will go out and do a process of monitoring, see whether it is necessary to take action, and if then there is action that can be taken. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Are there any other further comments, etc.? And I'm going to ask the Vice Chair just to clarify, because we obviously have item 4, which is the listed building consent for the bin store for this particular one as well. So we're going to have 2 separate votes on these, even though they're obviously related to the same application.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've touched on what I was going to say. Yeah, as the Chairman says, we'll be holding 2 votes. Vote 1 will be on item 3, which is specifically for the use of outdoor space and erection of the bin store with timber fenced enclosure. The second vote will be on item 4, which is the list of building consent for the bin store with the timber fenced enclosure. We'll need a proposer and a seconder for each, and please be mindful when you are voting, these are specifically for these planning applications and not any licensing or consent issues that we may have discussed. Back to you, Chairman. Thank you.
So we need a proposer and a seconder. I think we have a...
For item 3.
Item 3. And Councillor Pittman proposing it, Councillor Morris seconding. And then for item 4, we need a proposer and seconder.
Shall we take the vote on 3 first and then
well,
have the proposer
I think
on
I'd like
4,
to have the proposer and seconder lined up for thank you, Councillor Griffiths as proposer, and seconder, Councillor Settle. Thank you. So if we go to item 3, can we have all those in favour, please indicate. Any against? No? Abstentions?
I believe Councillor Collins was absent for part of the discussion.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. So that's carried. So item 4, could we have an indication, please? All those in favour? Any against? That's unanimous as well. Thank you. Both items. That concludes the formal.
Chairman, there are appeal decisions
Yes,
just to be...
yes, but that concludes the formal part of the applications. But we are going to look, as we always do, at page 58, which has an index of appeal decisions. So that's something that we're going to discuss with the officers. You can see we have 3 particular appeal decisions there, all of which have been allowed. So a little bit of background information because...
You got the, you want me to talk about?
Yes, please, thank you.
Can you give me the list then? Lend your agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we've had after having a good run last year, we've had a bit of a bad run this year. We've lost several appeals in a row now. So that is something that we're going to be looking at in more detail. The top one here relates to an access on Whitehills Road. There was a highway safety landscaping issue that we were concerned about, but the inspector wasn't as concerned about as we were. The middle one relates to a permission in principle application, so that's kind of like a light touch outline application, where the key issue there was that we felt that it wasn't minor infill development because the size of the gap involved was too wide for it to be infill. The inspector took the view that there were some garden sheds and the like within that building, or within just beyond the site, and concluded that they were such that it meant it wasn't infill. Now that's not the approach that we've taken on such matters since the local plan introduced that policy 2018, and on the basis of this single decision we don't propose to change our stance, because we've had probably 15 appeal inspectors who've agreed with our approach before this. But it's obviously something that we will be mindful of when looking at this type of application. And the final one is quite a large prominent property on the edge of Staining, sort of towards the edge of Blackpool really, where we had concerns over the scale of the extension in the green belt and the impact on the property itself, and the inspector disagreed. Again, it's perhaps a subjective decision. The key test is whether it's disproportionate extension to a property in the green belt. Disproportionate extension is quite a subjective word, so we reached a view that we felt was consistent with decisions that we've made elsewhere, and the inspector disagreed. So like I say, we have lost these 3. One that's not mentioned here is a more recent appeal that we lost on Friday, which is for the erection of 45 properties on a greenfield site outside of Ray Green. So that's a scheme, a site called the Brooklands, where going back in time, we had previous applications there, previous appeals there, which were successfully defended because the council didn't have a 5-year housing supply. Were defended because the council did have a 5-year housing supply. In this case, the inspectors accepted information provided by the appellant that the 5-year housing supply wasn't in place, and therefore they've allowed the appeal on that basis. They found the site was harmful in landscape terms, that the scheme wasn't delivering appropriate. It's supposed to be properties for the elderly, so there was some design concerns. They listed a series of concerns, but overrode those because of the benefits of providing housing when a borough is said to not have a 5-year housing supply. So that is very disappointing, and could have reasonably significant implications for how we deal with applications moving forward in advance of the local plan being prepared and adopted, or the replacement local plan being adopted. So that is something that officers are mulling over, and it will be discussed further at more senior levels than me, moving forward in the next week or so. But as we have an item on the agenda for appeals, I didn't want to swerve that one and not give you the news on that one, I'm afraid.
Any questions regarding that, Councillor Goodwin?
Can I just ask, is it the Lytham side of Ray Green or going up toward Ribby Hall?
The site in question is if it's off Mill Lane, so it's near round the back of the villa.
Yes.
If you know where
Yes,
we're talking. So
I
if
do.
you go around the green, if you're coming from Ribby Hall, past the school, almost to the War Memorial, turn right down there, and it's off there.
Thank you.
It's off the road before that. It's off a residential. Brooklands is a residential road just near to where Simon Rigby's house was, if you knew where that was. It's residential cul-de-sac, but it's between the windmill and Raybrook and the railway line. So you will see it when you're on the train, but in sort of going around Ray Green in a vehicle, you wouldn't see it.
Thank you.